My name is Madison Cole, and what I'm about to tell you still feels like a nightmare I haven't fully woken up from. 2 years ago, I stepped into my brother's backyard birthday party as a healthy 29-year-old woman. By the time I left, I couldn't feel anything from the waist down. I didn't leave in my car, I left on a stretcher. And the people who should have been rushing to help me, they stood still. They laughed. They accused me of making a scene. That's the day my family stopped being my family. It started like any other summer Saturday in Atlanta. The air was thick with heat, the kind that sticks to your skin like guilt. I remember adjusting the neckline of my blouse in the rearview mirror, trying to look presentable enough to avoid another backhanded comment from my mother. It was Derek's 32nd birthday, my older brother, the family golden boy. My mother had called me 3 times that week, reminding me how important it was for me to show up. "He's your only brother, Madison," she had said. "It would mean a lot if you made the effort." What she really meant was, don't embarrass us by staying away again. I had spent the last decade trying to establish boundaries with them. I lived 2 hours away, built a life I was proud of, worked as a child psychologist, and finally surrounded myself with people who respected me. But guilt is a funny thing. Even when you've buried it deep, a single phone call can dig it up like it never left. So I agreed to come. One afternoon I told myself I could endure a few hours of superficial smiles and passive aggression. I didn't know that would be the last day I'd walk on my own 2 feet. When I pulled into the driveway, the place was already packed. SUVs lined the curb like a showroom. I recognized a few of Derek's old college buddies, men in backward caps, red plastic cups, already in hand, laughing too loudly. I braced myself and stepped out of the car, smoothing my skirt. I'd worn something modest, polished, safe, something that wouldn't give my mother feedback ammunition. The front door was open, the smell of grilled meat drifting through the air. Inside, the house looked the same as it always had, expensive, sterile, like a showroom nobody lived in. My mother appeared at the end of the hallway, arms outstretched but stopping short of a real hug. "You made it," she said, eyeing me from head to toe. "You look comfortable." Translation: "You don't look like the version of you we approve of." I gave a tight smile and followed her outside. There were balloons, catered trays, a full bar set up on the deck. Derek was near the pool, surrounded by friends' beer in one hand, other arm around his fiancée. When he spotted me, he smirked. Well, well, the prodigal sister returns. There was a brief, one-armed hug, quick, firm, patronizing. "Did you bring a gift?" he asked, only half joking. I handed him a small envelope with a card, and a gift card to REI. He liked hiking, at least he used to. He barely glanced at it before tossing it onto a side table. Then he turned back to his friends. The message was clear. I'd done my duty, now stay out of the way. I found a quiet corner by the lemonade table and took a deep breath. I told myself this was normal. This is what family had always felt like for me, something you endure, not something that heals. But something about that day was different. The air felt charged, like lightning was gathering in the clouds, even though the sky was clear. Maybe it was the way Derek kept glancing at me like he was planning something. Maybe it was the way my father kept pretending I wasn't there. Maybe it was just instinct, some buried animal sense that knew something is about to go very, very wrong. If you've ever walked into a room and known deep down that the people in it don't really see you, not as you are, but as some version they've made up, you'll understand what I mean. And if you've ever been hurt in that kind of space, only to have your pain dismissed as drama, then please let me know where you're watching from. Leave a like, share your thoughts, and stay with me, as I share how one prank shattered everything and built something new from the ruins. Because sometimes it's not the fall that breaks you, it's the people who walk away afterward. My father's silence has always been louder than his words. Growing up in the Cole household, you learned early that the volume of your voice didn't matter, only your alignment. If you were aligned with Dad, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you were me. My father, Richard Cole, was a corporate lawyer with an obsession for order, discipline, and legacy. He wasn't the type to raise his voice. He didn't have to. A simple glance over the top of his glasses could kill a conversation. A sigh could crush a room. His presence alone rewrote the rules of any space. He wasn't cruel in the obvious ways, no shouting, no slapping, but he knew exactly how to make you feel small with precision. And he had perfected that craft on me. My mother, Marla, played the balancing act. On the surface, she was a Southern hostess with perfect manners and a frozen smile, always the first to offer sweet tea or change the subject. But under that smile was a quiet compliance that cut deeper than Dad's cold logic. She didn't ignore pain, she absorbed it and rerouted it away from discomfort. If your truth might make Thanksgiving awkward, she'd hand you a plate and tell you now's not the time. And then there was Derek. 3 years older, all-state athlete, varsity debate captain, class president, the prodigal son with the perfect jawline and charming laugh. From his first trophy to his last DUI, Derek was never questioned, never doubted. He had that slippery charisma that turned cruelty into comedy. He called it just teasing when he'd snap my bra strap in front of his friends. Just a joke when he spread that rumor in high school about me sleeping with a teacher. My parents would shake their heads sighing, "Boys will be boys. Don't be so sensitive, Madison." Don't be? And that was my assigned role in the family drama, the overly emotional one. The one who took things too seriously. The one who just couldn't let things go. My needs were inconvenient. My anger dramatic. My pain exaggerated. Every time I tried to speak up, I was reminded that I wasn't suffering, I was overreacting. That narrative shaped everything. I remember once when I was 8, Derek pushed me off the swing set at the park. My ankle turned at a sickening angle. I screamed in pain, sobbing while my mother dug through her purse for a Band-Aid, and my father said, if it were broken, she wouldn't be screaming. Let's go. It was broken. Hairline fracture. But no one ever apologized. That's what growing up in that house felt like, walking around with a limp, while everyone else insisted you were fine. By the time I reached college, I'd mastered the art of silence. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to explain. I started letting the conversations roll past me like static. It was easier that way, safer. But inside, the resentment grew like rust under paint, eating away at every memory that once felt warm. When I got my master's in psychology, no one came to graduation. When I bought my first apartment, no one visited. When I published my first research paper, Derek joked, "So proud of my little sister, she knows how to spell trauma now." And yet I kept showing up for birthdays, for holidays, for Mother's Day brunches, where I paid the bill but got a passive-aggressive jab about how I still hadn't settled down. I kept coming back because part of me still hoped they'd change, that they'd look at me and finally see me, but they never did. The birthday party was supposed to be just another attempt, another offering, another maybe this time they'll get it. But as I stood there by the pool that day watching Derek flex and boast my father manned the grill like a general and my mother rearranged napkins with military precision, I realized something. They hadn't changed. I had. I wasn't the same girl begging for a seat at their table anymore. I had carved out a life of my own, found people who listened, learned to name the things I'd been taught to suppress. And yet somehow here I was, still hoping for scraps of approval from people who couldn't even offer basic human decency. That realization should have been freeing, but I didn't get to walk away, because before the day was over, Derek would make sure I couldn't walk at all. When people talk about childhood memories, they often recall birthday cakes, scraped knees, or summer vacations. I remember the day my brother locked me in the crawl space under our house during a thunderstorm. I was 9. The lights went out, the air turned thick with mildew and panic, and all I could hear above the storm were his muffled giggles from the floorboards. I stayed there for hours. When my parents finally opened the door after I had screamed myself hoarse and clawed at the wood until my fingers bled, they didn't ask why he did it. They didn't ask if I was scared. They asked, "Why didn't you come out sooner?" as if I had chosen to sit in the dark while the house shook from thunder. That was the first time I understood something very adult. Some people will bend reality to protect their favorite version of the truth. And my family's favorite version was that Derek was perfect and I was problematic. That dynamic didn't just shape isolated moments, it rewrote my childhood. It colored everything. There was the time Derek poured bleach into my shampoo bottle when I was in middle school. I went to school with random orange streaks in my hair and a scalp that burned. The school nurse thought it was a chemical reaction from a bad dye job. My mother said, "You shouldn't leave your things where others can get to them." When I was 15, Derek hacked my online diary and printed out a private entry where I had written about struggling with body image. He passed it around to his friends. I remember walking into the kitchen after school, red-faced, crying, clutching the papers, and my father reading them silently before saying, "Well, maybe you shouldn't be writing things you can't defend." Each time something like that happened, I told myself it was the last, that this time they would believe me, that maybe I hadn't explained it well enough the last time. But no matter how clearly I spoke, my words always came back to me warped. You're overreacting. You're just jealous. You need to toughen up. After enough years of being gaslit, you stop trusting your own instincts. I'd question if things had really happened the way I remembered. I'd try to see things from Derek's perspective. Was he just joking? Was I too sensitive? Was it really that bad? But therapy taught me something I wish I had known sooner. If it hurt you, it matters, even if no one else agrees. I started therapy when I was 25 after a panic attack at work landed me in the ER. I told the therapist it must have been stress. She asked me to describe my support system, and I laughed. She didn't. That was the first time someone looked at my story not as a collection of complaints, but as evidence, as trauma, as something real. It was a hard pill to swallow. Because once you acknowledge trauma, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend your childhood was normal, or that your brother was just rowdy. You can't go back to swallowing your pain to keep the peace. You either heal, or you keep bleeding. And healing meant confronting how many times I'd been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. Like when Derek broke my phone in college because I wouldn't lend him money. He told my parents I dropped it in the toilet. They believed him. I paid for the replacement myself and never brought it up again. Or when I got accepted into a PhD program and Derek said during dinner, guess someone had to make up for not being hot. My father laughed. My mother winced but said nothing. I smiled through it, like I always did. But the worst part, the part I'm most ashamed of, is how often I internalized their version of me. I started believing I was dramatic, that I did make things worse, that maybe I didn't deserve better, until the day came when my body refused to play along with the lie anymore, when the pain became undeniable, when my legs gave out and no amount of just walk it off could fix it. That day wasn't the beginning of the pain. It was the climax of years of silencing it. And as I lay there staring at the sky from the cold concrete, unable to move, it wasn't just my spine that cracked. It was the narrative my family had built around me, the one where I was always fine, always exaggerating, always to blame. It shattered. And in that fracture, something else began to take root, a truth I could finally hold on to. By the time I turned 21, I had learned how to disappear in plain sight. I didn't slam doors. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't call out the digs or the sideways glances at family dinners. I just left early, smiled less, called less. I moved out the moment I could afford to taking a modest apartment in Savannah with a tiny balcony that faced the highway. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that alone made it feel like freedom. I remember the first night I slept there. No creaking floorboards, no Derek's music vibrating through the walls, no footsteps pacing like judgment down the hallway, just silence and the low hum of distant traffic. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. I had to rebuild everything from the ground up. I worked part-time jobs while earning my graduate degree. On weekends, I volunteered at the local youth center, mostly helping kids with learning differences navigate emotional regulation. Many of them came from homes where emotions were treated the same way mine had been, as threats. I didn't tell them that I wasn't there to bleed into their space, but deep down I knew we shared the same language. That was the first time I realized what broke me might also be what guides me. Therapy became my map. It didn't always make me feel better. In fact, some days it made me feel worse, pulling up old memories like weeds with roots that had grown into my identity. But slowly, I began to notice patterns. I saw how often I minimized myself, how I apologized before speaking, how I flinched internally at even the suggestion of conflict. My therapist Janet once said to me, "You keep trying to win a game where the rules are rigged against you. What would happen if you stopped playing?" That question haunted me for months. I started setting boundaries. At first, they were small. I stopped answering my mother's texts immediately. I didn't come home for Derek's engagement party. I skipped Easter brunch. The world didn't explode, and strangely, no one asked why. It was like they noticed my absence but preferred not to confront it. That silence in itself was an answer, but the guilt lingered. There's a particular ache that comes with disappointing people who never really saw you clearly to begin with. You start questioning your own sanity. Was I being petty, unforgiving, ungrateful? Then I remembered my 15th birthday. Derek had thrown a party the night before, trashed the living room, broke a lamp, left food out until ants took over the kitchen. I cleaned the whole thing up before school thinking, maybe, just maybe they'd thank me. They didn't. Instead, I came home to a passive-aggressive note from my mom asking why I hadn't returned the vacuum to the closet. That was gratitude in our house. Conditional, invisible, or withheld altogether. So no, I wasn't ungrateful, I was exhausted. Still, there were cracks in my resolve. When the invitation came for Derek's 32nd birthday, I stared at it for hours. The text was from my mom. "We'd love to see you. Derek's friends are asking if you'll be there. It's been too long." I knew what she was really saying. Come be normal for one afternoon. Pretend everything's fine. Smile. Don't make it about you. And just like that, the old script tried to run again. But this time I hesitated. I didn't want to go. I had every reason not to. I knew the air would be thick with unspoken slights and false smiles. I knew I'd feel like a stranger in my own bloodline. But guilt is a master of disguise. It shows up dressed like obligation, like duty, like being the bigger person. And I'd been bigger all my life. Bigger than the insults, bigger than the jokes, bigger than the betrayal. So once again I said yes. Not because I wanted to, but because I hadn't yet learned that no is a full sentence. As I packed an overnight bag, I promised myself it would be the last time. One more afternoon, one more performance. Just long enough to keep the peace. Just short enough not to lose myself again. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that this party would mark the end of pretending. That by the time the sun set, the fault lines in our family would crack wide open. And this time, I wouldn't be the one blamed for making them visible. I arrived at the house just before 2 o'clock, exactly the time the invitation said the party would begin. Not early enough to be roped into setting up, not late enough to be criticized for disrespecting the schedule. That's how strategic I had become, calculating my entry like it was a war zone. Because in many ways it was. The driveway was already lined with luxury cars, the kind my parents couldn't afford unless it was for Derek. I parked 2 blocks away, not because there weren't spaces, but because I needed the time to breathe. I needed those extra few minutes to remind myself who I was now, not who they still believed me to be. As I approached the front door, I adjusted my blouse, pulled my shoulders back, and put on the smile I used to practice in the mirror before family holidays. The one that said, "I'm fine. I'm good. I don't feel out of place at all." My mother greeted me like a politician working a donor line, an air kiss, and a once-over. "Oh good, you made it," she said, as if I were a florist delivering late. "I told you I would," I replied, my tone even. "Well, everyone's out back. Try to be festive. You know how Derek likes things lighthearted." That was code for don't be yourself. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Don't exist in a way that forces us to look at what we've done. I stepped through the living room where lavish gifts had already piled up. Golf clubs, designer watches, a new drone. The excess didn't surprise me. Derek's birthday was always treated like a national holiday. But the photograph taped to the biggest box caught me off guard. A brand new jet ski, price tag north of $12,000. I knew because I had almost bought one once for a friend's charity auction and backed out when I realized I couldn't afford both that and rent. "That's from us," my mother said, proudly appearing at my side. "He's always wanted one. Your father had it custom delivered from Miami." I nodded, swallowing hard. For my own 30th birthday 8 months earlier, they had mailed me a $25 gift card to Macy's. No note, no call. Still, I said nothing. I placed my small envelope, just a card, and a $150 prepaid Visa on the table, suddenly embarrassed. But what could I do? That was my limit. And anyway, I wasn't trying to compete. I had long since accepted that I wasn't in the same league, not in their eyes. We moved outside to the backyard, where the newly built pool deck glistened under the Georgia sun. It looked freshly sealed, polished like a showroom floor. There were about 30 guests already there, most of them Derek's old frat brothers and their wives or girlfriends. Laughter rolled like smoke through the air. My father stood at the grill flipping burgers with the same mechanical focus he used when cross-examining witnesses. Derek held court near the pool, beer in hand, sunglasses pushed up like a crown. When he spotted me, he raised his drink. "Look who decided to show," he shouted. "The prodigal nerd returns." There was a smattering of laughter. I offered a nod and waved, unsure what else to do. He broke away from the group and walked toward me, swaying, just slightly drunk already. His hug was more like a shoulder check. "You clean up nice," he slurred. "I'm sober," I replied. "Let's keep it that way." He laughed like I was joking. As the party wore on, I stayed on the fringes, making small talk with a couple of Derek's friends' wives, both of whom looked equally out of place. We talked about books and work and our mutual discomfort with beer pong. I was finally starting to relax. And then came the shift. Derek got louder, more animated. His friends began to cheer at increasingly juvenile jokes. The old stories started. Remember when Madison thought the neighbor's cat was a demon? Remember when we filled her locker with sardines? Each one a humiliation pulled from the archive and dusted off like a treasured memory. I forced a smile. But when Derek shouted, "Hey Mad, remember your therapy phase? You were what, 16?" My feelings are valid, and mimicked me in a mocking voice. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I think I'll go inside," I said to no one in particular. "Aw, come on," Derek called out. "It's a party, lighten up." But I was already walking. As I crossed the pool deck, something slick caught under my flats. My foot slipped forward. A rush of panic surged through my chest. And in that split second before everything shattered, a single thought blazed through my mind. This wasn't an accident. If you've ever sensed danger just one breath too late, share your story in the comments. Because some betrayals don't come with warnings. They come with polished surfaces and smiling faces. And if you've ever been made small in your own family, I'd love to hear from you. You're not alone. There's a split second right after your body betrays you, where time doesn't slow down, it disappears entirely. One moment I was walking across the deck, clutching my purse and willing myself to make it to the door without crying. The next I was airborne. My foot had slid out from under me with such force I didn't even have time to brace myself. I just remember a strange weightlessness, my arms flailing the sky, flipping, and then a sound. A hard, wet crack that felt like it came from inside my own skull. Then silence. Not around me, there were still people talking, laughing the sizzle of the grill, but inside me, a white-hot stillness, a dead zone. I opened my eyes to a blinding sun, my head pressed against cold concrete, and one horrifying realization. I couldn't feel my legs. Not pins and needles, not pain, just absence. My heart began to race. I tried to move my right foot. Nothing. I tried to lift my hips. Nothing. My arms worked. I could push against the concrete barely, but below the waist there was no response. It was as if my body had been cut in half and only the top remembered I was alive. "Help," I gasped. My voice came out thin like a balloon deflating. The first face I saw was Derek's. He sauntered over, still holding a beer, still smiling. "Damn Mad," he laughed. "That was a full wipeout. You always had a flair for the dramatic." I blinked up at him. "I can't move," I said. "Derek, I'm serious." I hit my back. "Something's wrong." He rolled his eyes. "Here we go again." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shirt and shake the cruelty out of him. But I couldn't even sit up. Within moments, a small crowd gathered. Curious guests craned their necks to see what the fuss was about. My father pushed through, holding a plate of charred burgers. "What's going on here?" he asked, irritated. "I slipped," I said. "I hit my back on the edge. I can't feel anything below my waist. Please, I need an ambulance." His eyes scanned me like I was an unfamiliar stain on the carpet. "The deck's fine," he said dismissively. "I had it sealed 2 days ago." "You're being dramatic, Madison. Stand up." "I can't," I cried. "I'm not faking this. I need help." My mother appeared next, eyes wide, not with concern, but embarrassment. She knelt next to me, whispering, "What are you doing? You're humiliating yourself. This is Derek's day." I started sobbing, from fear, from fury, from the soul-crushing realization that even now, even as I lay broken on the ground, they didn't believe me. "I can't get up," I said again. "I need a hospital, please." Someone in the crowd mumbled, "Maybe she's drunk." "I haven't had a drink all day," I hissed. My voice cracked. And then through the sea of indifference, a woman's voice rang out, firm, professional, slicing through the heat like a siren. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Let me through." She was tall, mid-40s, with graying blonde hair tied in a low ponytail. She dropped to her knees beside me, took one look at my eyes, and nodded like something had clicked into place. "I'm Rachel. I work trauma at Grady. Madison, can you hear me?" I nodded, tears streaming. "Tell me exactly what happened." I explained everything as best I could. The slickness underfoot, the fall, the instant numbness. She checked my pulse, my spine, the swelling already forming under my blouse. Her tone shifted from calm to urgent. "You need an ambulance," she said, pulling out her phone. "And no one is to move her, not an inch." "She's being dramatic," my father tried to argue. "There's no way. She may have a spinal cord injury," Rachel snapped. "If you move her, she could lose what function she has left." For the first time, the crowd hushed. If you've ever been in a room full of people who doubted your pain, only to have one stranger see you, really see you, then you know how that moment can rearrange your entire life. If someone once saved you by believing in what others dismissed, share it. Those stories deserve to be heard. And if no one ever did, then let me be the first to say I believe you. Because that day Rachel didn't just call for help. She shattered a family's delusion and gave me a fighting chance to survive. I lay there on the concrete, Rachel's presence, the only anchor keeping me from spiraling into full panic. Her hands moved quickly but gently, checking reflexes, applying verbal commands, trying to assess what my body could no longer communicate. "Can you feel this?" she asked, pressing her fingers lightly against my thigh. I shook my head. No, nothing. It's like my legs aren't even there. Rachel's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Okay. Stay with me, Madison. I've called EMS. They're about 7 minutes out. I'm going to keep you stable until they get here." Around us, the energy shifted. The laughter had died. Conversations turned into whispers. Partygoers slowly backed away, not out of concern, but discomfort. My mother hovered nearby, fiddling with her necklace, eyes darting between guests as if trying to gauge how bad this would look. My father stood stiffly by the grill, arms crossed as though sheer posture could hold this reality at bay. And Derek, he was gone. I scanned the yard and saw him standing by the new jet ski, back to me, surrounded by 2 of his friends. He wasn't even pretending to care. Rachel reached up to block the sunlight from my eyes. "We're going to be okay, I promise." Then she did something that no one in my family had ever done before. She looked around, pointed to the edge of the deck where I'd fallen, and said, "This doesn't look like an accident." She leaned over, touched the slick surface, then rubbed her fingers together. Her brow furrowed. "This isn't water. This is oil." I blinked. "What?" She sniffed her hand. "Deck oil, ceiling oil, fresh, slippery as hell." As if on cue, Derek turned toward us, hearing his name whispered across the backyard. "Hey," Rachel called out, not unkindly, but with authority. "Did you do any maintenance on this deck recently?" Derek hesitated. His confident swagger faltered. Yeah, I sealed it, like last week." "Did you reapply anything today?" she asked. He shrugged. "Maybe just a little, just for shine." Rachel nodded slowly, then turned back to me. I could see the thoughts forming in her eyes, the quiet fury masked by professionalism. "Madison," she said gently, "I need you to focus on your breathing. Help is almost here." I nodded, trying not to cry again. The pain was growing, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was still the silence. My parents hadn't said a word. No apology. No comfort. Not even a damn question about whether I could move my toes. It wasn't until I began dry heaving from the pain that my mother rushed forward, not to check on me, but to hiss through her teeth, "You're ruining this party, again." Rachel physically placed herself between us. "Back up, now." My mother looked stunned, like someone had slapped her. "I'm her mother, and I'm a trauma nurse. Get away from her." If there was a moment when the illusion finally broke, when the fantasy of a loving, functional family disintegrated before everyone's eyes, that was it. Because when Rachel spoke, she didn't just protect my body. She protected my truth. The ambulance arrived minutes later, red and white lights flashing like a countdown. The paramedics came fast, wheeling a stretcher through the back gate. Rachel briefed them, efficiently suspected spinal trauma, loss of sensation below the waist, possible concussion. As they prepared to move me, a young female paramedic named Sarah leaned down and said, "You're safe now. We've got you." And for the first time in hours, maybe years, I believed it. They braced my neck, slid a rigid board beneath my back, and strapped me down. Every shift sent daggers of pain through my torso, but I didn't fight it. I couldn't. Before they lifted me, Rachel bent low again and whispered, "I'll make sure they document everything." "Thank you," I breathed. "No one else here is going to protect you, but I will." As the stretcher lifted, I caught one final glance of my parents. My father looked pale, furious, his mouth tight. My mother dabbed at her eyes, though I wasn't sure if it was from guilt or embarrassment. Derek was nowhere in sight. And the crowd. They were already drifting back to the patio, murmuring, uncertain whether they'd just witnessed a tragedy or a scandal. But I knew exactly what it was. It was the day my body broke, and the day their lies did too. If you've ever been hurt and then told to smile through it, you know the kind of silence that scars deeper than words. And if you've ever had a stranger defend your truth louder than your own family, you understand the power of being believed. If you've ever lived that moment, I hope you'll share it. Because this silence, it ends today. The back of the ambulance smelled like antiseptic and rubber, but I barely noticed. The neck brace restricted my vision to the ceiling. Fluorescent lights, metal rails, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. I tried to focus on it to anchor myself, but it only reminded me that I was now a patient in my own story. Sarah, the paramedic, with the calm voice and steady hands, knelt beside me. We're giving you oxygen and something mild for the pain. You're going to feel a little cloudy, but we want to keep your vitals stable. I nodded slightly, though it took effort. Every movement felt like wading through concrete. Rachel had stayed until the very last second. She helped log roll me onto the backboard, told the medics what she'd observed, and even collected a sample of the slick substance from the deck. Her voice echoed in my head. This was deliberate. The word buzzed through my skull like static. Deliberate. That meant someone did this, on purpose. I closed my eyes as the ambulance pulled away. For a brief second, I let the vibrations of the road rattle into my spine. But it wasn't just pain, I felt it was fury. It built in my chest like pressure under a lid. Not just because I was hurt, but because no one cared. No one except a stranger. As we turned onto the highway, Sarah asked softly, "Did you lose consciousness at any point?" "No," I whispered. "I remember everything." She nodded. "Good. That helps. Do you remember what caused the fall?" I hesitated. The deck was slick. Too slick. Rachel, the nurse, said it wasn't water. It felt like oil. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyebrows lifted. "Do you believe it was put there intentionally?" "I don't want to believe it," I said. "But yes, I think it was a prank." Sarah exchanged a look with her colleague, then reached for the radio clipped to her shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 41 en route to Grady Memorial. Be advised we are requesting law enforcement to meet us on arrival. Possible intentional injury with spinal involvement. Victim conscious, vitals stable, but reports loss of motor function below T10. I stared at the ceiling, blinking back tears. They're calling the police, not because I asked, but because they had to. My mind reeled. Derek had dumped deck oil onto the boards for fun. Maybe to watch me slip. Maybe to get a laugh. Maybe just because he could. I remembered his voice drunk mocking just moments before I fell lighten up mad. This was how he did it, always, smiling while hurting me, laughing while twisting the knife. But this time there were witnesses, medical professionals, evidence. For the first time there would be consequences. When we arrived at the hospital, nurses and techs moved like a choreographed dance team, one starting the IV, another cutting my blouse open for imaging, another hooking leads to my chest. They didn't ask if I was okay. They treated me like I wasn't, and that alone made me want to cry again. A male nurse with kind eyes named Carlos leaned over and said, "We're getting an MRI to assess spinal trauma. Have you been able to move your legs at all?" "No," I said, "not since I fell." "Okay, that tells us something. It doesn't mean it's permanent, but we want to rule out compression." As they wheeled me into imaging, a woman in navy scrubs and a white coat joined the team. "I'm Dr. Nguyen," she said. "I'm the attending neurosurgeon. We'll talk after we review the scans, but just know we're going to take this seriously." Those 5 words nearly broke me, because no one in my family ever had. For years I had spoken softly, carefully, hoping to be believed. And in one afternoon, complete strangers had heard me louder than the people who raised me ever did. And now, the system was moving, police were involved, a case was forming. My voice, once called dramatic, now had legal weight. If you've ever been silenced, ignored, or called too much and still found a way to tell your story, you are not alone. And if you've just begun to find your voice, know this. It matters. It's enough. It can change everything. Because the moment people started listening, that was the moment I stopped whispering. The MRI room was colder than I expected, not just in temperature but in tone, clinical, icy. The walls buzzed with fluorescent indifference, and the machine itself roared like a mechanical beast as it pulled me in inch by inch. I stared up at the ceiling and tried not to panic. I tried not to think about what the images would show, or what they might not. The test lasted only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Afterward, I was wheeled into a recovery room and left under warm blankets while the scans were reviewed. I kept waiting for my phone to buzz. For a message, a call, something. It never did. Not from my mother, not from my father, not even from Derek. Maybe they were waiting to see what the damage was before they decided how guilty they needed to feel. Dr. Nguyen returned less than an hour later, tablet in hand, lips pressed into a neutral line. She pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Madison," she began, "I've reviewed your scans." I braced myself. "You have an incomplete spinal cord injury at the T12L1 junction. There's a compression fracture in 2 vertebrae and swelling pressing against the cord itself. That's what's causing your current paralysis." I swallowed hard. "Does that mean it's permanent?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not necessarily. Incomplete injuries vary widely. Some people regain a significant amount of function. Others don't. But we've already scheduled surgery for tomorrow morning to decompress the area and stabilize your spine with internal hardware. That gives you the best possible chance of recovery. And if it doesn't work, Dr. Nguyen didn't look away. Then we'll begin rehab. We'll adapt. And we'll help you build a life around the reality that remains. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to leave. I know, she said gently. That's why the police are here. My breath caught. They've already taken initial statements from the nurse at the scene and from paramedics. They're waiting to speak with you if you're ready. I nodded slowly. Yes, I want to talk. Take your time. They'll come when you're ready. Dr. Nguyen stood to leave, then paused. You're not crazy, Madison. I've seen hundreds of spinal trauma cases, and I've seen families try to downplay them. But this wasn't an accident. You deserve the full weight of justice behind you. It was the first time someone with authority told me I deserved anything. I didn't know what to do with it. I'd spent my whole life shrinking myself down, trying not to upset the balance, not to stir the pot. But the pot had boiled over, and now they had to taste it. When the detectives arrived, they were both women, Detective Sullivan and Officer Chen. Their presence felt different than I expected. Calmer. Like they weren't here to interrogate me, but to collect something I had that mattered. Madison, Detective Sullivan said softly. We've already spoken with several witnesses, including a nurse named Rachel Cooper. She saved me, I said. She also told us something important, that your brother admitted to applying oil to the deck shortly before you slipped. I nodded. He said it was just for fun, that it was a joke. Do you believe he intended to hurt you? No, I said, but I believe he didn't care if he did. That silence in the room after those words left my mouth was heavier than any diagnosis. Officer Chen glanced up from her notepad. And your parents? Did they intervene? I laughed bitterly. My mother told me I was ruining the party. My father said I should walk it off. Detective Sullivan nodded solemnly. Thank you. We're moving forward with charges. Jason will be booked for reckless endangerment resulting in serious bodily harm. Your parents may face charges related to medical negligence given the delay in seeking help despite your reported symptoms. I closed my eyes. I never wanted this. You didn't cause this, she replied. You're just finally being heard. And maybe that was the most unfamiliar feeling of all. I'd spent years yelling into the void, begging for acknowledgement. Now the system was doing what my family never could. Listening, believing, acting. If you've ever had to choose between silence and justice and still found the courage to speak up, you're stronger than you know. And if you're still waiting for someone to believe you, let this be your sign. You are not alone. The next morning, as they wheeled me into the operating room, I felt oddly calm. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was terrified. The idea of having metal screws placed into my spine, of waking up and still feeling nothing below my waist, made my chest tighten with every breath. But after everything I'd endured in the last 24 hours, the surgery felt like the first step toward something I hadn't had in years control. The anesthesiologist leaned over me, speaking in a voice designed to comfort. We'll count down from 10. You'll be asleep before you hit 5. He was right. I never made it past 8. I woke up in the ICU hours later, groggy and nauseous, the back of my body aching in places I hadn't known could ache. There were tubes monitors, a tightness around my midsection from the surgical brace. Carlos, the same nurse from earlier, was by my side. You did great, he said, adjusting the IV line. The surgery went smoothly. Dr. Nguyen will be in soon to talk to you about the next steps. Can I move? I croaked. Carlos hesitated. Some sensation returned during post-op testing, but we won't know the full picture for a few more days. I nodded weakly. The truth was, I wasn't expecting a miracle. But I had hoped. Just a little. Later that day, Dr. Nguyen came in with scans, reports, and a plan. We decompressed the spinal cord and stabilized your lumbar vertebrae, she explained. That gives you a fighting chance at recovery, but you're going to need intensive rehab. How long? I asked. Months, possibly longer. It depends on how your body responds, but you'll be transferred to a specialized rehabilitation center once you're stable. That will be your battlefield now. I was still absorbing that when Marcus, the hospital's social worker, arrived with a gentle knock and a folder. We'll begin coordinating your transition to rehab soon, he said. But I also need to talk to you about long-term care planning, housing accessibility, insurance, work options. It hit me all at once. My life wasn't just paused, it had split in two. Before the fall, I had a job I loved, an apartment I could barely afford, and a daily routine that, while exhausting, was mine. After the fall, I didn't even know if I could go to the bathroom without assistance. I live on the second floor, I whispered. There's no elevator. Marcus nodded. We'll look into accessible housing programs. You won't have to face this alone. But alone was exactly how I felt. Because through all of this, not one word had come from my family. No call, no flowers, no text, no visit, just silence. It hurt in a way that surprised me. After everything, I should have expected it. But there's something uniquely cruel about being paralyzed and still hoping the people who caused it might show up to apologize, to say something human. Instead, I heard from a detective. Jason had been arrested the night of the incident, charged with felony reckless endangerment. His booking photo made the local news. My parents were being investigated for negligent delay in emergency care. My name was being whispered in newsrooms, across police desks, in hospital break rooms. But not once in my own home. Then Rachel, the nurse who had saved me, sent flowers. A small bouquet with a handwritten note. Keep fighting. They don't get to write the ending. I cried when I read it. Not because it was poetic, but because it came from someone who had no obligation to care and still did. That small act was louder than anything my family had ever done for me. If you've ever been left to suffer while the ones responsible walked away, and still found a way to keep going, I want to hear your story. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in a hospital bed wrapped in bandages, holding on with everything you've got and choosing to live anyway. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to rebuild from scratch, consider subscribing. Not for me, but for you, to remind yourself that healing doesn't require permission. 10 days after my surgery, I was transferred to the Atlanta Regional Spinal Rehabilitation Center, a facility designed to teach people like me how to live again. It was sterile but warm in that strange way hospitals sometimes are. Wide hallways, low beds, handrails along every wall. It didn't feel like a place you came to heal. It felt like a place you came to begin over. My first morning there, I met David, my physical therapist. Mid-30s, lean with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I'm not here to coddle you, he said, pulling up a rolling stool. But I am here to fight for every inch of recovery you've got in you. That okay? It was more than okay. It was exactly what I needed. We started small, learning how to shift my weight in bed, how to roll onto my side, how to sit without toppling over. Every move hurt, sharp burning stabs that radiated from the incision down to where sensation stopped. But pain meant something was still working. Each day I pushed harder. 2 days in, David had me sitting at the edge of the bed, feet dangling lifeless but there. I tried to wiggle a toe, nothing. But when he tapped my knee with a reflex hammer and my thigh twitched ever so slightly, I cried. You see that, he said, grinning. That's your body trying. We work with that. Meanwhile, the legal side of my life was spinning just as fast. Michael Greenberg, a personal injury attorney specializing in spinal trauma, had agreed to take my case. He was efficient, compassionate, and aggressive in a way I couldn't be yet. We'll pursue both criminal accountability and a civil suit, he explained. Jason has already made incriminating statements. And your parents' refusal to call for help immediately. That's more than negligence, it borders on willful disregard. It sounded surreal hearing my family described in legal terms. Defendant, negligent, reckless. But it was accurate, and it mattered. Michael also filed paperwork to freeze the remainder of my parents' home equity, since it was likely their insurance wouldn't cover the full extent of my medical costs, ongoing therapy, and accessibility renovations. Their house, the one I had scrubbed floors in as a child, might now fund the life they nearly destroyed. Part of me recoiled at that idea. Another part found it poetic. As the legal gears turned, rehab continued. I graduated from the bed to the mat table, from assisted turns to using parallel bars. I still couldn't walk, not really, but I could try, and trying in this place was everything. There were setbacks, of course. Infections, fatigue, days when the pain made it hard to even speak. But there were also breakthroughs, tiny sparks of movement, tingling in my thighs, the first flicker of hope that I might stand again someday. On the 11th night at the center, I received an email from the school district where I had worked. The principal had heard about the accident. She expressed her sympathy, told me the faculty had raised funds to help cover my expenses, and without pressure offered me a new position. Curriculum specialist, she wrote, mostly remote, flexible. We want to keep you part of this community, Madison. I sat there rereading it over and over. After all that had been taken from me, something was being offered back. Not charity. Dignity. That night, I wheeled myself to the therapy room just to be alone. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. Shorter now, paler. But something in my eyes had changed. Not just grief, not just rage, but grit. I whispered to myself, "You are not what they said you were." And for the first time, I believed it. If you've ever been told you're too broken, too dramatic, too much, and still kept going, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell your truth. Because somewhere, someone is being told the same lies, and your courage might be the proof they need to fight back. And if you've made it this far into my story, you already know I'm not just telling it for me anymore. 3 weeks into rehab, Michael called with an update that changed everything. "Madison," he said over speakerphone, "we've secured a formal settlement proposal from your parents' insurance. They're offering the maximum liability payout, $1 million. I didn't say anything at first. $1 million, it sounded like a lottery win. But to me, it was the cost of standing still, of waking up every morning with metal in my spine and wheels under my body. It wasn't compensation, it was acknowledgement. They've also agreed to liquidate assets," he added, "to cover an additional $2 million in damages. Your parents are selling the house. That house. Every floorboard I used to tiptoe across. Every hallway where I was told to lower my voice, smile more, be easier to love. They were giving it up. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because for once they couldn't lie their way out." "What about Derek?" I asked. "Pled guilty, felony reckless endangerment, 2 years prison, 3 probation." A pause. He gave a full statement, admitted to everything. I leaned back in my wheelchair, letting that settle in. Derek, who once laughed when I cried, who told his friends I was just looking for attention, even as I lay motionless on a concrete slab, had finally been forced to say the words. "He did it," Michael continued. "It's your decision whether we proceed to civil trial or settle here." I thought about it, not for days, but for seconds. "Settle," I said. "I want to move forward." Legally, that part of my story was over, but emotionally it was just beginning. After the settlement, the rehab center held a small meeting to help me transition back to independent life. New apartment, ground floor, fully accessible. Occupational therapy would continue twice a week. I'd need a part-time caregiver for the first few months, then possibly less, depending on how well I adapted. And then, like clockwork, the media got wind of it. A local paper ran the headline, "Woman Paralyzed by Brother's Prank Wins $3 settlement." They called it a tragic accident. They called Derek remorseful. They used words like family tension and misunderstanding. But I knew better. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, a legacy, the result of decades of silence, favoritism, and emotional abuse dressed up as family tradition. Derek didn't pour oil on that deck in a vacuum. He did it because he never thought anyone would stop him. Because no one ever had. Until now. Meanwhile, the hate mail began trickling in. Anonymous messages, social media comments. "You ruined your brother's life over a fall. Should have just stayed home. Families fight. You took it too far." But I also received something else, something stronger. Emails from strangers who'd been hurt by family members and told it was their fault. From women who'd begged for medical care only to be ignored. From people paralyzed by more than trauma. People like me. Their stories lit up my inbox at night when the loneliness crept in. They reminded me I wasn't alone, not in my pain, and definitely not in my recovery. One email stood out. It was from a woman in Ohio who wrote, "You gave me words for things I never knew how to name. Thank you for surviving." I cried reading it, not from sadness, but because someone had seen me fully, not just as a victim, but as evidence that healing is possible. That was the moment I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. If you've ever been told to forgive before you've even been believed, this is your space. If you've been pressured to protect those who hurt you because of the blood in your veins, this is your validation. And if you've been forced to carry pain just to keep the peace, know this, you are not wrong for finally choosing yourself. 6 months after the accident, I moved into my new apartment, a 1-bedroom unit in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood, with ground floor access, wide doorways, and a 0-step shower. It wasn't luxurious, but it was the first place I'd ever lived that felt like mine, not just logistically, but emotionally. It was freedom in the form of smooth hardwood floors and light switches I could reach from my chair. I hired a caregiver named April, mid-50s, sharp, no-nonsense, with a dry sense of humor, and a heart big enough to hold all my frustrations without taking them personally. The first week she helped me cook. The second she watched as I made scrambled eggs on my own. The third she just sat nearby while I folded laundry, cheering every tiny success like it was a touchdown. "You've got this," she said every morning. And for the first time in my life, I started to believe someone when they said that. While I adjusted to life physically, I also had to reimagine my future professionally. I couldn't return to teaching in a traditional classroom. I couldn't stand for hours, run after students on the playground, or kneel beside them at their desks. But I could still teach. The school district offered me a remote position as a curriculum specialist, reviewing teaching materials, developing trauma-informed resources, and training educators on how to recognize the invisible wounds children carry. It wasn't what I'd pictured when I first dreamed of being a teacher, but in some ways it was more important. I was no longer just teaching kids, I was equipping adults to see them, to stop brushing off the quiet child in the back who flinches when someone raises their voice, to ask better questions, to listen sooner. In a strange way, it felt like closing a loop in my own story. Around that time, I began weekly sessions with a trauma therapist named Claire. She was gentle but direct, with a talent for asking questions that cut straight to the bone. During our third session, she said, "Madison, what do you believe your family owed you?" I sat with that question for a long time. I think I said slowly, they owed me the truth. They owed me belief. Not protection from the consequences of what happened, but the dignity of being taken seriously. She nodded. That's fair. It was the first time I'd said that out loud without feeling guilty. In therapy, I unpacked years of gaslighting. The way Derek's voice lived in my head, even when he wasn't around. The way my mother's whispers of "you're overreacting" had taught me to doubt my instincts. The way silence from my father felt like both a punishment and a command. Claire helped me understand the golden child scapegoat dynamic. How families sometimes assign roles and cling to them even when it harms everyone involved. How my pain had been inconvenient, and so they denied it, not because it wasn't real, but because acknowledging it would have forced them to confront themselves. That was the deepest wound of all. It wasn't the fall. It was the way they watched me lying there and chose image over injury. But in that wound, something powerful had taken root. Voice. I started journaling again, sharing pieces of my story online, not for pity, but for connection. And the response was staggering. Not viral, not flashy, just honest. People reached out. Women, men, survivors of abuse, people with disabilities, those estranged from their families, people who had fallen figuratively or literally and clawed their way back up. Each message was a lifeline, a mirror, proof that what I'd lived through wasn't rare, just rarely spoken. If you've ever rewritten your life from the rubble of someone else's choices, I hope you'll share your journey. Not for closure, but for clarity, for connection, for someone who's still in the silence. Because healing doesn't require forgiveness. It requires truth. And for the first time in my life, I had both. 2 months after the settlement, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. The handwriting on the envelope was immediately familiar, slanted, clean, meticulous, in a way that made my stomach knot. It was from Derek. I stared at it on the kitchen counter for 3 days. I moved it from one end of the table to the other, unopened, like it might spontaneously combust if I got too close. Part of me didn't want to read it. Not out of fear, but exhaustion. I didn't want another manipulation, another gaslight dressed as sentiment. But another part of me, one I couldn't entirely silence, needed to know what he'd say. On the 4th morning, I opened it. It was handwritten, 5 pages long, and for once, it didn't sound like Derek. He didn't crack jokes. He didn't downplay what happened. He didn't try to excuse it. He wrote, "I know I caused you pain, not just with the fall, but with a lifetime of cruelty I dressed up as jokes. I've spent the last few months in prison therapy programs learning things I should have understood years ago. You weren't sensitive. I was brutal. And our family let me be." My hands trembled as I read. He talked about growing up under Dad's rigid expectations, about how he learned early that domination was survival in our house, how being the golden child felt like a pressure cooker, how he took it out on the only person he knew wouldn't fight back me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not writing to ask for it. I just want you to know that I see it now. All of it. I sat with that letter for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it in the back of my desk drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a record. Not for closure, but context. He was still my brother. Nothing could undo the damage. But for the first time, he wasn't hiding behind charm or cruelty. He was just honest. And that mattered more than I expected. My parents, on the other hand, never contacted me again. Through distant relatives, I heard they'd moved to a gated community in Florida, downsized to a smaller home after selling the one I'd once scrubbed floors in as a child. Apparently, they were telling neighbors their daughter had suffered a tragic accident, and that they were helping her quietly behind the scenes. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel surprise. I felt distance, clean and quiet, like someone had finally closed a door that had creaked open for far too long. Instead of mourning the parents I never had, I began pouring my energy into the people I did have. Rachel, the nurse who'd first spoken up, still checked in on me every few weeks. David, my physical therapist, helped me walk 15 steps unassisted with braces. Claire, my therapist, helped me navigate the tangle of guilt and grace that came with slowly releasing the people who once defined me. And then there was Thomas. We met at a disability advocacy event. He was a physical therapist who specialized in spinal cord recovery and had read my online essays. At first, I kept him at arm's length. Romance felt like a foreign language, one I had unlearned after so much betrayal. But Thomas was different. He didn't flinch at my scars. He didn't pity my chair. He asked questions no one else did not about what I'd lost, but what I wanted next. We talked for hours over coffee and late-night Zoom calls. We shared stories, not strategies. And slowly, something I thought I'd buried began to rise again. Hope. He saw me not as a survivor, not as a case study, but as a woman, a partner, a whole person. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by grief, but by possibility. If you've ever received an apology too late and still chose to move forward anyway, know this: your healing isn't dependent on their remorse. It's yours, fully, authentically. And if someone new walks in and says, "I see you," let them. You deserve to be seen not as broken, but as becoming. 2 years have passed since the day my brother poured oil on the deck and called it a joke. 2 years since I laid on cold concrete, unable to feel my legs, while my family stood nearby and said I was being dramatic. 2 years since the version of me who still hoped to be chosen, believed and loved by them, died quietly in the shadow of a backyard party. And yet here I am. I live in a new apartment now, ground floor fully accessible. I drive a car with hand controls. I still use a wheelchair most of the time, but with my leg braces and crutches, I can walk short distances awkwardly, slowly, but on my own terms. Some days are better than others. Some mornings I move with more ease than I ever imagined I would again. Other days, spasms or fatigue knock the air out of me and I cancel everything, choosing rest over resilience. But I no longer punish myself for those choices, because strength, I've learned, isn't always visible. Sometimes it's choosing softness, choosing not to fight the body you live in, choosing to stay. Career-wise, I've flourished in ways that surprised me. As a trauma-informed curriculum specialist, I train teachers across the state on how to recognize the signs of abuse, neglect, and emotional suppression in their students. I help rewrite the systems that once failed me. I teach educators how to listen to the child who goes quiet when their name is called, how to ask different questions, how to believe sooner. It feels like reclaiming something. I also joined a peer mentor program at the same rehab center where I once struggled to sit upright. Twice a week, I meet with newly injured patients, men and women whose entire lives have just been upended, and I tell them the one thing no one tells you soon enough. This isn't the end. It's just a different beginning. That work is how I met Thomas. We've been together for 9 months now. Our relationship is quiet, steady, full of mutual care. He doesn't try to fix me. He doesn't ask what I was like before the accident. He holds space for both who I am and who I was. With him, I've learned that love doesn't have to hurt, that affection can exist without condition, and that intimacy isn't measured in perfection but in presence. My chosen family has grown beyond anything I ever imagined. The nurses who stayed, the colleagues who believed, the survivors who wrote to me from hospital beds and kitchen tables and quiet bedrooms across the country whispering "me too." And somewhere in the space between all that support, I found myself again. I'm not healed, not in the clean storybook sense. I still grieve. I still have dreams where I'm running. I still wonder what it would have been like to grow up in a home where tenderness wasn't rationed. But I don't need their apology anymore. Their absence no longer defines me. Because healing, I've come to understand, isn't about erasing pain. It's about expanding around it, making room for new joys to exist beside old scars. If you've lived through something that broke you open only to find that your life didn't end there, I want to thank you. Your resilience is not invisible. Your story matters. And your healing, however messy, however nonlinear, is sacred. And if this story found you at a moment where you feel like you're still lying on the floor metaphorically or literally, know this: you're not alone. And you won't stay there forever. So if any part of my journey has spoken to something inside you, I ask this from a place of quiet strength. Subscribe, not because this story is special, but because you are. Let's build a space where truth doesn't have to scream to be heard, where survival isn't shameful, where healing is proof of power. Together we can rewrite the ending. Reflecting on the past 2 years, I realize that my journey is far from typical. It's been a path riddled with pain, loss, and unexpected resilience. What I once thought was the end turned out to be a beginning, a profound transformation shaped by hardship and healing. The physical scars on my body are reminders of that fateful day, but the deeper wounds, the emotional betrayals and silence taught me invaluable lessons about self-worth, boundaries, and the true meaning of family. I learned that family isn't defined by blood or convenience, but by who shows up when you need them most, who listens when your voice trembles, and who believes when the world doubts. Choosing to share my story has been both terrifying and empowering. It's a testament that even when we're broken, our voices carry power. Healing isn't linear, nor is it the same for everyone, but it is always possible when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and seek connection. To anyone watching who feels unseen or unheard, please know that your pain is real, your experience valid, and your healing worth every ounce of effort. Don't let anyone else's denial dim your truth. You have the right to define your own story. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've found a piece of yourself in my story, I invite you to be part of this community where strength is nurtured and voices are honored. Together we can continue to grow, to support, and to heal. Remember, your resilience is not just surviving, it's thriving in the face of adversity. And that is a story worth telling. This conclusion is approximately 300 words, gently rounding off the narrative and ending on a hopeful, empowering note. If you want, I can help package the entire script or assist further.